There was a man who was last seen on screens in a movie that he never got to see finished. In March 2023, Lance Reddick passed away. A sudden heart attack killed him on a Friday morning in Los Angeles when he was 56 years old. He had already filmed his parts for Ballerina from the World of John Wick months before, in 2022, on a soundstage in Prague. But the movie didn't come out in theaters until June 2025, more than 2 years after he died. When the lights went out in the theater and Charon appeared on screen for the first time, standing perfectly straight and with a look that said everything. Without saying anything, a lot of people in the room felt a tightness in their chests that had nothing to do with adrenaline. This is how Ballerina gets to you. Not just as another action movie or a spin-off from another franchise. It comes with a lot of emotional baggage, a complicated history behind the scenes, and a question that the John Wick universe has been trying to answer for a few years. Can it survive without John Wick himself at the center of it all? Ballerina's answer to that question is honest, not perfect, and at its best moments. It is completely electrifying. Let's go back to the beginning. The story of how this movie got to us is almost as interesting as the movie itself. The John Wick universe is one of the most unlikely things to happen in modern action films. No one thought that a movie about a retired assassin who goes after Russian mobsters because of a puppy would become one of the most popular action series of the last few decades. But that's exactly what happened. Chad Stahelski directed the first John Wick movie, which changed the way American action films are made. It had precise choreography, long takes that showed every punch and kick without cutting. A mythology of assassins with their own rules and hierarchies. And Keanu Reeves, in the prime of his adult career, every new chapter added to this world. The Continental, the high table, the marquee, the coins made of gold, the markers in the blood. Every new movie added a new layer, made new rules, and introduced interesting new characters. This built a universe that could support stories beyond John Wick. Ballerina is the first big bet in this direction. Ana de Armas is the only thing that could make this bet work. In 2019, she played Eve Macarro, a young woman who was raised in the ways of the Ruska Roma, the group of dancer assassins that appeared in John Wick, Chapter 3, Parabellum. The idea is simple. Eve's father was killed when she was a child, and she wants to get back at the killer. But Ballerina isn't an easy movie to watch. It has a tension between two worlds, the stylized, choreographed, almost operatic world of the John Wick films and a more personal, emotional story that wants us to care about Eve the same way we care about John. Does it do that all the way? We will go into more detail about that later on. But I can tell you that Ballerina is one of the most creative and visually daring action films you'll see in 2025 when it's at its best. Let's talk about Lance Reddick now. Watching Charon's scene in this movie is very powerful. It isn't just nostalgia, and it isn't just fan service. It was an actor who clearly loved this character and spent years making Charon seem like a reliable, serious person with a loyalty that couldn't be faked. He doesn't have a lot of screen time in Ballerina because Charon wasn't the main character. But every second he's on screen carries the weight of everything he stood for. In this franchise, since the first movie, it's sad that Lance Reddick never got to see this finished movie. Not many recent movies have been able to do that. He didn't know that this would be his last movie role until the end of the shoot. And Lionsgate, the company that made and distributed the movie, made the right choice by leaving his appearance. in the movie exactly as it was filmed, without making any digital edits or trying to make an artificial version of him for extra scenes. The real Lance Reddick is on the screen, filmed in 2022 in top form, doing what he did best in 2023's Chapter 4 of the John Wick series. Charon died on screen before the actor did. Ballerina happens before Chapter 4, so Charon is still alive. In the story, this adds an emotional layer that all fans of the series will feel. You know what's going to happen. But seeing him there, perfect, behind the Continental's counter, is a gift. When you sit down to watch Ballerina, you should know that it is a goodbye. This is the last time this amazing actor will be seen on any screen or in any format. And that context is important because it turns what could be a regular, supporting scene into something that sticks with you. Ballerina, on the other hand, is a movie with a lot more than just a cameo. The movie went through a lot of problems during production, including arguments over reshoots, a year-long delay, composer changes, and writers coming and going. But it still came out in theaters with energy, personality, and a main character who has everything needed to keep this franchise going for years. The movie came out in Brazil on June 4th, 2025, one day before it came out in the US. Lionsgate made it clear to Brazilian audiences what world they were entering with the full title Ballerina from the World of John Wick. And it makes sense. Brazil is a big market for action films, and the John Wick brand means a lot here. The Brazilian fans, who have been following the franchise since the beginning, are very loyal and passionate. We're going to talk about everything there is to know about Ballerina. In the next parts, we'll tell you how this movie came to be and almost didn't get made. We will look at every part of Eve Macarro's story in detail, including every character, scene that works, and moment when the movie falls short. We will talk about Ana de Armas and what she brings to this role, the controversy surrounding the reshoots with Chad Stahelski, and the action choreography that at times rivals the best the franchise has ever done. And we'll finish with an honest judgment. This isn't here to sell you a movie. It's here to help you understand exactly what you'll see when the screen lights up. The world of John Wick has grown. The dance has started, and it starts with fire, tears, and a man who isn't here anymore to see what he helped make. In 2016, a screenwriter named Shay Hatton saw the trailer for John Wick. Chapter 2, not the film, the preview, and at one point in the trailer, there is a quick scene of ballerinas practicing on stage. They are so graceful and cold, which is the opposite of how brutal the world is around them. It was a small thing. Chapter 2 used a visual texture to set the mood for the Ruska Roma, an assassin group that pretended to be a ballet company in New York. Most people who saw that trailer thought, what an interesting picture. Shay Hatton, on the other hand, thought, there is a whole movie here. He began to write. Not because anyone told me to. Not because he had a deadline or a contract. He wrote because he couldn't stop thinking about the idea. A young woman who grew up in this group and was trained to be both a ballerina and an assassin, using the grace of ballet as a weapon. A main character who kills with the same skill as she dances. A spec script is a script that was written without a contract or a guarantee of sale. The writer is just hoping that someone will want to buy it. The bet worked out better than anyone could have hoped. Lionsgate bought Hatton's script in July 2017. But there is one important detail about this purchase that sets the stage for everything. That came after. Hatton's original script was a separate story. There was no John Wick. There was no Continental. It didn't have any gold coins or a high table. It was just the story of a ballerina who was also an assassin looking for revenge. In the world of organized crime, Lionsgate saw the script's immediate potential, but they also saw a chance that went beyond the script itself. As part of the John Wick universe, they told Hatton to rewrite the whole story. What does that mean? You write a story that is completely yours, and the company that buys it says, "Great, now rebuild it from scratch inside a franchise that already exists, with established rules, characters you didn't create, and a mythology you need to follow." This is a huge limit. But Hatton had an edge that most writers in that situation wouldn't have. He really understood what made the John Wick world special. He didn't want to fit his story into a mold that already existed. He wanted to make the mold bigger. The rewrite was so well received in the industry that the script made the famous 2017 Blacklist, which is a list of the best unproduced scripts in Hollywood that executives and producers vote on every year. Being on the blacklist doesn't mean your script will be made into a movie, but it does mean that the industry thinks this story is worth telling. It is one of the best ways to tell how good an unproduced screenplay is. But this origin story has something even more interesting about it. When Lionsgate bought the script and started working on it, some of the ideas that Hatton had for Ballerina were used directly in John Wick. Chapter 3, Parabellum, which came out in 2019. In Parabellum, there is a memorable scene where Russian ballet dancers act as assassins. This is where dance and violence come together in a way that felt like a new aesthetic statement for the A franchise. Some of that came from the ideas Hatton was working on for this spin-dash-off, in a delicious twist. The movie Hatton was writing helped make the scene that gave him the idea to write the movie in the first place. Creation fed the inspiration that led to more creation. A perfect circle of creative ideas within the same franchise. This is where the timeline of the universe starts to make sense in a very specific way. Ballerina happens at the same time as Parabellum, which means that Eve Macarro and John Wick are both alive at the same time. But their worlds haven't fully crossed yet. This choice of story was on purpose and smart. Ballerina fits right into the middle of the story like a piece. That should have always been there, but you didn't know it was missing. Instead of making a story that happens after everything we know, which would have to deal with the weight of a franchise finale. There is even a scene in the movie where Eve and John meet briefly backstage at the Ruska Roma rehearsal, just like in Parabellum. When you first watch Ballerina and see that scene, you know it right away because Hatton put a lot of thought into how the story would flow over time. It isn't just fan service for the sake of fan service. It is narrative continuity used on purpose. A lot happened between the sale of the script in 2017 and the start of filming in 2022. The process of making a movie is rarely a straight line. And Ballerina is a great example of how much a project can change before the first camera is turned on. The first problem was that development in Hollywood takes a long time. Scripts that are bought stay in development for years, writing, throwing away, and rewriting versions. Producers come and go. In 2019, while chapters 3 and 4 of John Wick were still being planned and made, Ballerina was in the background. It was a promise for the future while the main line of the franchise moved forward. After that, the pandemic hit. In 2020, the whole world came to a halt, and almost all Hollywood projects that were already in the works were put on hold or changed. Ballerina was the same. The schedule that was in place before March 2020 was no longer in place at all. But when the world began to change, something important had changed in the movie's development. The talk about who would be the main character was more serious than ever, and Ana de Armas' name was being thrown around as a real option. In May 2020, Lionsgate publicly confirmed that they were looking for their main character. At the time, people said they wanted the kind of talent of a Chloe Grace Moretz. They wanted a young actress who could carry an action movie on her back and had the right mix of vulnerability and toughness that Eve's character needed. There was never an official announcement that Chloe Grace Moretz would play the part, but the fact that they said her name says a lot about what they were looking for. Someone who could make you believe that a young woman who was still figuring herself out could survive in the most violent and unyielding world that modern action films have ever made. The choice they made was better. Ana de Armas started talking about the main role in October 2021. In April 2022, Lionsgate made it official at CinemaCon in Las Vegas. Ana de Armas would play Eve Macarro, the ballerina. People were really excited about the news, and they were right to be. Ana had just given one of her best performances ever in Andrew Dominic's Blonde. The character needed someone who could switch between being emotionally fragile and physically strong. In 2016, Hatton wrote a script by himself, based on an idea he saw in a trailer, and it was officially on its way to becoming a real movie. But there were still many steps to take to get there, and some of them were much more difficult than anyone thought they would be. In October 2019, Lionsgate said that Len Wiseman would direct Ballerina. On paper, this choice made sense. Wiseman's career was based on action films with great visuals. He made and directed the first 2 films in the Underworld series. It was a world with its own mythology, hierarchies, and choreographed violence. Just like the John Wick world. Live Free or Die Hard 2007 was the 4th movie in the Die Hard series with Bruce Willis. It showed that he could mix big action scenes with characters that people already knew and loved. He wasn't a new director being thrown into an established franchise. He'd worked in the genre before, but it wasn't Wiseman's resume that got him the job. There was a talk. Chad Stahelski, who directed all of the main John Wick films and produced Ballerina, had known Wiseman for a long time. Before he became a director, Stahelski was one of the best stunt coordinators in the business. He also worked as a stuntman on the movie Live Free or Die Hard, which Wiseman directed himself in 2007. The two had already built up this level of trust while working together on an action movie. When Wiseman told Stahelski about his idea for Ballerina, Stahelski knew he had found someone who understood the physical language the franchise needed. The partnership looked strong. No one could have guessed in 2019 how much this relationship would be put to the test years later, in ways that made the news. The next step after picking the director was to pick the main character. And this process took longer and showed more than any official press release said it would. It took almost 2 years to find Eve Macarro. Lionsgate knew exactly what it needed. An actress who could carry an action movie completely believably. Physically, not with camera angles and editing that hide flaws, but with real presence, with a body in space, and with the same level of commitment that Keanu Reeves had shown since the first John Wick. The reference to Chloe Grace Moretz in 2020 was a sign of things to come. She had done Kick-Ass in 2010, which showed that she was strong and young at the same time, which worked. But Moritz was never hired, and there was never an official announcement. It was just a way to measure the creative direction. People were talking about Ana de Armas behind the scenes as early as 2021. When you look back at her life up to that point, it's easy to see why her name came up. In 2017, she was in Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. It was a small role, but she was so present on screen that you couldn't forget her after the movie was over. In 2019, Knives Out put her in the middle of a thriller that was a huge hit, with both critics and the public. She fit right in with the spy action world in No Time to Die, which came out in 2021, and Andrew Dominik's disturbing portrait of Marilyn Monroe, Blonde, was in post-production. This was a brave and deep work that went far beyond what most genre films need. Ana de Armas wasn't the first person who came to mind. She was a good choice. She started talks in October 2021, and CinemaCon made the official announcement in April 2022. But most people don't know what happened between the announcement and the start of filming. Specifically, the condition Ana put on the table that changed the script's creative direction in ways that are still present in the movie. Ana de Armas asked that a woman, writer, be part of the process, not as a suggestion or a favor, as a requirement. She thought that Eve Macarro's story needed a woman's voice in the creative process to work the right way. And she said this publicly later. Shay Hatton wrote the script, and he is a very good writer who is clearly dedicated to the world he helped create. But you couldn't just look at Eve from the outside. You had to know her from the inside out. Ana also wanted to make sure that at least one person in the writers' room understood interiority in a way that came from real life. Lionsgate paid attention. Emerald Fennell was hired to work on the script in July 22 to dot. The name couldn't be more important. Fennell wrote and directed Promising Young Woman in 2020. It was a revenge thriller that used the genre to look at trauma, female rage, and the systems that protect abusers. The movie was so well written and well acted that it won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay in 2021. She was a filmmaker who knew exactly how to make a female character, who was out for revenge work without falling into easy genre tropes. The official screenwriting credits for the movie did not list Fennell's work. The Writers Guild of America called it uncredited, additional literary material on screen. But anyone who knows how scripts are made in Hollywood knows what that means in real life. She went through the material, found the places where Eve's voice needed more depth, and worked to add that depth. Ana got exactly what she wanted. Along with Fennell, other writers worked on the project. Rebecca Angelo, Lauren Schuker-Bloom, Michael Finch, and Wiseman himself all added to it in ways that the WGA recognized as extra material. A lot of people working on a script can mean that the creative process is out of control, but it can also mean that the production is serious about getting it right, and is willing to call in anyone who can help fix the problems that come up. As the main cast came together in the second half of 2022, it became clear how big the project would be. Keanu Reeves said he would be in the movie, but not as the main character. Instead, he would play a big role that would connect Eve's story directly to John Wick's. Ian McShane would play Winston, the mysterious owner of the New York Continental, who would connect Eve to the world of assassins. Anjelica Huston would play the director again. She was the leader of the Ruska Roma and did a great job in Parabellum. And Lance Reddick said that Charon would be there, but no one knew it was the last time. The new cast members also had interesting choices to make. Gabriel Byrne, an Irish actor who has worked in a lot of high-profile films over the years, was cast as the Chancellor, the main villain in Eve's story. Norman Reedus, who will always be known for playing Daryl Dixon in The Walking Dead, took on a role that Wiseman said was very important for the character's future. And Catalina Sandino Moreno, a Colombian actress who was nominated for an Oscar for Maria Full of Grace in 2004, played a part that the movie kept secret as one of its best plot twists. In December 2022, the cast was full. The cameras were about to start. But Ana de Armas had already started the hardest part of the whole thing before any cameras started rolling. The practice. The stunt team at 8711. The company started by Chad Stahelski and David Leitch that created and defines the action language of the John Wick franchise, had certain standards for its main characters. Before each movie, Keanu Reeves spent months in intense training, learning jiu-jitsu, judo, tactical shooting, and other martial arts to the point where his body learned the moves so that the camera wouldn't have to lie about what it was seeing. Ana de Armas went through the same thing. She trained with the 8711 team for 4 months before filming started. She did this for 4 to 5 hours a day, learning classical ballet, martial arts, self-defense, and choreographed fighting that looks like a dance but hurts for real. Jackson Spidell, the stunt coordinator, said in public that Ana wore her bruises like medals. This meant that she would show up to training the next day, already knowing that her body had been tested the day before. But she kept going anyway. This level of dedication is not a small thing. It is what makes you believe in an action scene instead of just watching it, of course. The question was whether all of this dedication from the actress, the creative team, and the amazing supporting cast would be enough to get through what was coming during production, as we will see. The answer was not simple. The cameras started rolling in Prague on November 7th, 22. It seems poetically appropriate that most of Ballerina was filmed in the Czech Republic and Hungary. Prague seems like the perfect setting for European action films. Its Gothic architecture mixes centuries of history into a dense visual tapestry. Its cobblestone streets create textures that are impossible to reproduce on a soundstage, and its atmosphere changes between elegant and threatening in a way that fits perfectly with the world of professional assassins that the John Wick series built. Prague is also in other big-budget action films for a reason. It's a great place to set stories where beauty and violence coexist. The crew moved to Prague and the nearby cities of Kladno, Kowim, and Kolin to get the European look that the scripts called for. The Prague Continental Hotel, which is important to the story, was filmed in real places in the city. The production design used existing spaces to build on the visual language set by earlier films. For fans of the franchise, walking into this Continental and seeing the familiar patterns in the hallways, the lighting, and the strict formality of everything is a special pleasure that the movie gives with care. But first, we need to talk about how the movie was made before we can talk about where it was made. Ballerina's way of doing things is closely linked to a company and a philosophy that shape how the John Wick franchise looks. Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, 2 stunt coordinators who became directors, started 8711 Entertainment. They came up with a way of making action movies that has had an impact on almost every serious action movie that has come out since 2014. The name comes from the addresses of the first two places they worked together. It's easy to explain their method, but very hard to do. Each action scene must be filmed as real choreography, which takes long enough for the viewer to see the actor's whole body in space, without the fast cuts that hide stunt doubles or physical limitations, and without the camera angles that make anyone look like a good fighter in the edit. This philosophy requires one thing above all else: actors who really do the work. Keanu Reeves became famous for how much he worked out for the John Wick films. He spent hundreds of hours training before each movie and did most of his own stunts. His body learned the move so well that the camera could stay at any angle without showing a lie. The standard was set by 8711. Reeves was the embodiment of it. And every new actor who joins the universe must show the same level of commitment. Ana de Armas knew this before she signed any contracts. She worked with Jackson Spadell and the A711 team for 4 months before filming started on a program that combined several different types of training at the same time. Ballet technique was the basis of Eve's training. This was not to make her look like a dancer on screen, but to give her the control, balance, and spatial awareness that a professional dancer has and that an actor without that training can't convincingly imitate. Martial arts such as jiu-jitsu, hand-to-hand combat, and weapons work were built on top of this. Unlike other Hollywood training programs, 8711 doesn't teach movements. They teach ideas. There is a huge difference. You can do a movement when you learn it. You can improvise, adapt, and react when you understand the basic ideas behind it, like how body weight works, how the center of gravity shifts in a fight, and how to change the direction of your opponent's force. This ability to react is what makes it look different from rehearsed choreography on screen. Spittle said that Ana would come hurt and then come back the next day, that she saw every bruise as proof that she was getting better. This isn't PR hype. It's the kind of detail that stunt coordinators use to tell the difference between actors who really deliver and actors who only deliver enough for the camera nut. To notice, we will talk about the specific parts of the movie that showed the results of this investment in more detail later. For now, though, it's important to know that Ana de Armas' physical credibility in ballerina is not something she was born with. It is work. Months of hard work that hurt, based on real skill. The main character was physically ready and the creative team was in place. During this time, the supporting cast was confirmed in waves in public. Keanu Reeves came onto the set. Ian McShane showed up to film his scenes. Angelica Houston played the director again, and she brought the same natural authority to the role that she does to any character who has silent power. Lance Reddick filmed his scenes as Charon, calm, exact, and fully present, with no idea that this would be the last time he would ever be in a movie. Norman Reedus had to change the way he worked completely for Ballerina. In interviews, he said, that the action scenes in the John Wick films require a level of choreography that is very different from the loose and sloppy fighting that was in The Walking Dead. Darrell Dixon. In the show, the visuals were intentionally awkward. Daryl fights in a brutal and useful way, not a graceful way. In the world of John Wick, every hit has a shape. Readers said that the process was like learning a whole new language for his body. He also said that he admired Keanu Reeves for being able to handle this level of physical demand for years. Gabriel Byrne, on the other hand, brought an intellectual threat to the Chancellor. He was a presence that worked through voice, through a look, and through the way he took up space without needing violence to scare people. One of the best things they did was cast Byrne in the role. We'll talk about his performance in detail. When we get to the cast analysis, the main filming ended in January 2023, and the crew left Prague to finish more work in Budapest. Hungary had different places than the Czech Republic, and in some cases they were more open. The architecture fit the story's needs in the second act. The movie was mostly captured in its original form. Ballerina went into post-production in February 2023. The date that was announced for the release was June 7, 2024, less than 18 months after filming started, which is a tight but doable schedule for a big-budget action movie. Lionsgate had plans for advertising. They went out on a date. They had a film. They didn't have the final version that would be shown in theaters. It became clear that there was work to be done at some point between the end of filming in 2023 and the start of 2024. A lot of work. What people said publicly about the work, who did it, and how it was done became one of the most talked about behind the scenes stories in action films in years. To understand what happened in the 2024 extra photography, you first need to know what was at stake. For Lionsgate, Ballerina was more than just a movie. It was the first real growth of the John Wick universe beyond the main character, which was a test to see if the franchise could go on without Keanu Reeves, if the movie didn't do well creatively. It wouldn't just hurt the box office. It would be about the future of a whole universe of stories that Lionsgate wanted to keep making. The choice to do more. Shooting in 2024 wasn't a sign of panic, even with all that weight on top of everything else. It showed that you were serious. That's how some people who were there talked about it. Some people had a very different story to tell. A report from the Wrap in October 2024 changed the conversation about Ballerina in a way that no press release could ever fully fix. The report said that Chad Stahelski had to shoot most of the movie again. Len Wiseman, the director who was hired in 2019, was not on set for a lot of these extra shoots. That what would be shown in June 2025 would be a completely different movie from what Wiseman had originally made. Stahelski, the universe's architect, would have rebuilt it to meet the standards set by the previous 4 films in the franchise. The internet went crazy. People who liked John Wick had strong opinions. Some people were happy because if Stahelski was directly involved, the franchise's DNA would be safe. Some people were sad and asked, what happened to Wiseman's original idea? Did he do something? That was not good enough. And who would get the credit if the movie did well? These are good questions. But the answers, when they came, were more complicated than any headline could show. In October 2024, Chad Stahelski was the first to speak out publicly. He confirmed that he had worked on more shooting, but he completely denied the story that he had reshot most of the movie. Stahelski said that the process was 2 weeks of extra photography, not reshoots, which means problems and remaking. but the addition of new sequences that made the story that had already been filmed better. He made it clear that he worked with Wiseman, not instead of him, and that their relationship was still strong. Wiseman, on the other hand, gave an exclusive interview to the website Film Stories just days before the movie came out in June 2025. In this interview, he was more open about how upset he was with the story that had developed. He said that seeing his movie talked about in public as a troubled production was something that bothered him for months. He said that in Hollywood, the word reshoot usually means failure, which isn't always true. He said that extra photography is a normal part of the refinement process for any big-budget production, and that the way the story was sensationalized was unfair to everyone involved. Both sides have some truth to them, and there are things we will probably never know for sure based on everything that has been made public. We can safely say that the majority of the movie was filmed between November 2022 and January 2023, according to both Stahelski and Wiseman. There was more production in February 2024, and this included new action scenes. Norman Reedus went all the way from Japan to Budapest to film more fight scenes for his character. Reedus himself has confirmed this fact, and the movie that came out in June 2025 used this 2024 footage in a way that fit perfectly with what had been filmed in 2022 and 2023. It's harder to keep track of what creatively happened during this process, like which scenes were added, which were changed, and which narrative choices were changed. But one thing that becomes clear when you watch the movie is that the second half of Ballerina, especially from the time they get to Hallstatt, has a different energy and confidence in its action scenes than the first act. This difference is good if it comes from the 2024 extra production. The composer swap is another part of this behind-the-scenes story that didn't get as much attention as it should have. It was confirmed in April 2023 that Marco Beltrami and Anna Drubic would write the music for Ballerina. Beltrami is a good composer for action and horror films. He has worked with Wiseman before on Live Free or Die Hard and Underworld, Evolution. Drubic was an interesting addition. He was a Russian composer who had worked on European films before. The mix made me think of a score that would be a little different from the sound of the other John Wick films. But in September 2024, right in the middle of the extra production and refinement process, they were replaced by someone else. Tyler Bates and Joel J. Richard, who had already written the music for all the main parts of the John Wick series, were asked to write the music for Ballerina from scratch. This is a big change. It's a lot of stress to rescore a whole movie in just a few months, with a release date of June 2025. But the decision makes sense when you look at the bigger picture. If the goal of making more of Ballerina was to make it sound, look, and feel like a movie in the John Wick universe, then having Bates and Richard's score was an important part of that process. The end result is a soundtrack that works. Bates and Richard know how to use music to build tension in this world. They know when to push the soundscape and when to let the action choreography speak for itself. In Ballerina, there are times when the movement, image, and sound come together in just the right way, which is something that most action films don't do. The choice to change composers, which may have been very dramatic behind the scenes, had a positive effect on the film's sound. When you look at the whole history of this production from a distance, you can see that it goes beyond the specific argument about who directed what and when. It shows how much people were looking forward to Ballerina. Lionsgate couldn't afford to release this as a separate product. It was the first real test of whether the franchise could live on without John Wick. Lionsgate had plans for an expanded universe with other series, characters, and movies. Those plans were in doubt if Ballerina failed. If it worked, it would have opened doors that could keep the franchise going for another 10 years. Len Wiseman knew how heavy this was. After the movie came out, he talked about how hard it was to direct a movie that had to be both new, introducing a new main character, a new story, and a slightly different tone at the same time. Respect and honor a visual language and mythology that fans loved because it was consistent. There is no perfect answer to this creative tension. With Stahelski's help during the extra shoots, Wiseman was able to find a balance that makes more people happy than it makes them angry. Ballerina is not the same as John Wick 5. It's different, more emotional at its core and more willing to let Eve be a person instead of just a fighting machine. But when the action starts, it is as precise and creative as the franchise has always been. The release date was moved from June 2024 to June 2025. 1 whole year. This is a huge choice for a studio with a release calendar, and it will have real effects on their finances. But when the movie finally came out in early June 2025, with Betts and Richard's score, the extra action scenes added in, and the final edit put together by Nicholas Lundgren, Jason Ballantine, and Julian Clathry, editors working together, which shows how complicated the material is, the reviews were good enough for the talk about. Eve Macarro's future to continue. Every big production has its problems. What matters is what you see on the screen. The screen shows a little girl, her father, and a night that will change everything. There is blood and music at the start of the movie. There isn't a lot of action at the beginning. And there isn't a chase scene that throws you right into the middle of things without any explanation. Ballerina begins with something more personal and disturbing. A child, a house, and people who shouldn't be there. It is a deliberate and correct choice for the story. Before you see adult Eve Macarro kill enemies with perfect accuracy, you need to know what she lost. Because all the violence that comes after that is fueled by a real, personal, and specific wound. Eve's father, Javier Macarro, is an assassin who works for the Ruska Roma. Her mother was a member of a group that the movie calls the Cult. This group is made up of former assassins who live alone, follow their own rules, and have a level of violence that goes beyond the cold pragmatism that defines the professional assassins in the John Wick universe. The Cult doesn't kill people for money. It kills because it loves. Winston will later explain this difference in a way that perfectly sums up the mussed-up moral values of this world. Javier took Eve away from her mother when she was young. This kept her from being brainwashed by the Cult, but it also cost the mother's life. The Cult doesn't allow people to leave. It won't take kids who are missing. And when they find out where Javier is with Eve, they send the Chancellor and his men to get back what they think is theirs. The first scene is very emotionally violent. You see Javier fight to keep his daughter safe. You see young Eve being carried away as everything goes wrong. You see Javier die while helping Eve get away. It's not a heroic or movie-like death. It's a simple, quick, and permanent death that hurts. In this world, there is no good death. There is only the end. Then Winston Scott comes in. Ian McShane has a unique quality that not many actors can match. He can say things that are very calculated, with a fake warmth that makes you think he cares about you, even though you know he is only doing what is best for him. Winston is a man who does things for his own benefit, who follows orders because they are what keep the world running in a way he can control, and who really cares about some people in this system without ever mixing up caring with blind loyalty. He is a very complicated character, and the actor makes it look completely natural. Winston brings Eve, who is very young, to the Ruska Roma and the director. Casting Anjelica Huston as the director is one of the best decisions in the whole franchise. She has a long history in the movie business, with her father being John Huston and her grandfather being Walter Huston. She doesn't see this as a burden, but as a natural authority. You pay attention when the director talks, not really out of fear, but because the character has a kind of respect that comes from just being in the room. The director lets Eve into the Ruska Roma with the same coldness, as someone signing a contract. There is love here, but it is tempered by years of training young people to kill and the knowledge that not everyone makes it through. The next 12 years are shown in a short amount of time. The movie shows Eve growing up, training, turning her body into a weapon, and turning dance into a language that means two things at once: art and destruction. Romain Lecurbus's cinematography smartly captures this contrast, which is the visual heart of the movie. There are training scenes where you can't tell right away if you're watching a ballet class or a fight. And that's the point. Eve doesn't see a difference between the two. She has always thought of them as the same thing. Eve meets John Wick 4. The first time during this training period. It is a short scene that has been carefully planned. John is going to see the director, just like in Parabellum, and Eve watches him from a distance. This man has a reputation that precedes anything he could say. John also sees her, and in a few words, he plants a seed that will grow throughout. The whole movie, the idea that there is a way out of the cycle, that a person has the option to stop. This idea is both freeing and dangerous for a young woman who has grown up in a system that doesn't recognize exits. Eve finishes her training the way the Ruska Roma want her to, by killing a former member of the group as a final test of loyalty and skill. The movie doesn't make the ritual seem romantic or great. It is shown for what it is, a system that uses violence to get people to be loyal. That mixes obedience with belonging, and that gives people a sense of identity in exchange for freedom. Eve completes the ritual and gets the title of Kikimora, which is what Ruska Roma assassins in the field are called. Her first job is to keep Cadler Park, played by Choi Soo-young, safe. Eve is successful in her mission because she is efficient, focused, and cold when she needs to be. And for a moment, you think she might really be able to live in this system, do her job, and find some peace in being good at it. That illusion goes away. 2 months later, Eve is attacked by a man with a specific mark on his body while on a routine mission. This mark is the same one that the cult men who killed her father when she was a child wore. It's impossible for someone who grew up with that night burnt into every cell of her body to just finish the mission and move on. Eve kills. The attacker looks at the mark and feels something inside her change. She doesn't think about it when she decides to get back at someone. It is a force that was already there, just waiting for this to happen. She asks the director about the cult, and here the movie does something smart with the director's character. She doesn't deny that the cult exists, or act like Eve is making up a threat. She agrees with everything. and then she tells Eve that she can't go after them, that the Ruska Roma and the cult have been at peace for decades, and that breaking this peace would have effects that go beyond a young assassin's desire for revenge. The director's answer is politically correct in the world she lives in. Eve also finds it completely unacceptable. Eve doesn't need permission to protect the interests of the organization. She wants to get permission to kill the man who killed her father so she could live. The director can only hear one of the two conversations that are going on at the same time. Eve doesn't listen. This choice, simple, unavoidable, and full of consequences, is what drives everything that comes next. And this is where Ana de Armas starts to show the characters' different sides more clearly. Eve not following the rules isn't just her being a rebellious teenager. Eve is making the only choice that her mind will let her. She was taught to be efficient, to finish missions, and to not stop until the goal is reached. The system that made her ruthless with outside targets didn't see that one day the target would be something the system itself wanted to protect. She goes to the Continental in New York and finds Winston. The part with McShane is one of the best parts of the first act. Winston listens to her with the kind of careful attention that only someone who spends his life managing information as currency can give. When he speaks, every word is carefully chosen. He says something about the cult. That sticks. They are killers who do it for fun, not for money. Who don't follow the rules that keep the world of assassins going. Who are the closest thing to real chaos in the logic of this universe. Then he gives Eve what she needs, but not because he wants to be nice. Winston Scott always has his own reasons for what he does. A member of the cult named Daniel Pine is staying at the Prague Continental. People want to kill him. And as luck would have it, the cult's trail leads right to Prague. Eve starts, and the movie goes along with her in a way that will get more complicated, violent, and revealing than anyone, even Eve, could have imagined. The Prague Continental is introduced with the same visual grammar as all the other Continentals in the franchise. It has that mix of old-world luxury and cold functionality that says you are safe here, and any mistake here carries a price. The Czech architecture gives the space a certain weight, a weight of stone and history that the New York Continental, with all its American grandeur, can't fully replicate. The way the rules work in this world is almost like a feudal system, and the corridors in Prague have a medieval feel to them. Eve has a specific goal: to find Daniel Pine, get information from him about the cult, and get closer to the revenge that the director told her not to do. It's a simple plan, like most simple plans are. It looks good on paper, but is hard to carry out in real life. What she finds in Pine's room is not what she thought she would find. Daniel Pine, played by Norman Reedus, looks and sounds like he's really tired, but he's not the enemy Eve was looking for. He is a man who is running away, a member of the cult who is also an assassin, and is doing everything he can to get his daughter out of that world before the cult catches her again. The script doesn't need to point out the irony in this symmetry for you to feel it. Eve, who lost her father to the cult, sees a father trying to save his daughter from the cult. They are the same story, but they happen at different times. Reedus does something cool with Pine. He doesn't try to hide how violent the character's past was. Pine is clearly someone who hurt people in the cult, and the movie doesn't need to go into detail about how. He did it for you to get it. But he has a certain hopelessness about him that comes from the fact that he has already crossed the line. where redemption is possible and is trying to do at least one good thing before it's too late. Pine isn't very nice. He makes sense, which is different and more honest. Things get out of hand quickly in Pine's room. Lena, who is still just another cult assassin to Eve and the viewer at this point, raises the bounty on Pine's head. Because this universe works like this, where gold coins change hands as quickly as text messages. A lot of assassins show up at the hotel room almost at the same time. Eve's quiet entry turns into choreographed chaos as assassins from different countries, with different skills and styles, all meet in the same hallway at the same time. This is where Ballerina starts to show its best side. The fight scene at the Continental has the one thing that makes the John Wick series stand out from almost all other action films made in the last few years. Every move has real physical consequences. The hero doesn't beat up 50 people and then look completely fine at the end, which is something that happens a lot in action films. Eve gets hit. Eve gets sleepy. Eve does things wrong that need to be fixed right away. The choreography for this scene was based on Ana de Armas' unique physicality. She is more agile than strong, and she uses her surroundings in creative ways to find angles and solutions that a bigger, stronger fighter wouldn't think of because they wouldn't need to. One of the smartest things about the movie is how it changes the way people act physically. John Wick is unstoppable because he has gained power and skill over the years. Eve is unstoppable because she can adapt and doesn't see stopping as an option. The movie knows that there are two different kinds of lethal dot. In the middle of all the chaos, Pine makes a decision that sets the tone for the whole second act. He gives his daughter Ella to Eve. He tells her to keep the girl safe while he tries to buy time. It's a moment of weakness for a character who has spent his whole life building walls. And Reedus does it with a few simple gestures that say more than any words could. Eve and Ella leave the hotel together, and Lena stops her right away. Eve and Dare. Lena's first physical meeting is short and to the point. Lena knocks Eve out with the skill of someone who knows exactly where the body gives out, and then she takes Ella with her. Lena isn't who the movie says she is yet. Right now, she's just too good to be another cult henchman, and you know that even if you don't know what to do with that information yet. Dex, the Chancellor's right-hand man, shoots Pine outside the hotel. This character doesn't have a lot of psychological depth, but he serves a clear narrative purpose, to show that the cult can strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. Pine's attempted murder right outside the Continental breaks the rules of the space, which say that violence is not allowed inside. However, the pavements right outside are a different story. The Continental staff kills 2 captured assassins for breaking the rules in the hotel. Eve is spared because she was evaluated and found not to have broken any rules. This scene on the sidelines says something important about how this universe works. The rules are set in stone, but using them requires judgment. And Churchill, the manager of the Prague Continental, has the kind of quiet power that the best side characters in the series have always had. Eve is now alone, with no Pine, no Ella, and no real idea of where the cult is based. She goes to see Frank, an arms dealer. Abraham Papula plays him with the energy of someone who is always in a grey area, between the world of assassins and regular organized crime, never fully in one or the other. Frank knows something, but the cult attacks the armory before the deal is done. This serves 2 purposes at once. It adds more action to a small space with creative obstacles, and it shows that the cult has enough intelligence to quickly track both Eve and Frank keeps his word after Eve kills the attackers. He tells them that the cult is in Hallstatt, a town in Austria. Hallstatt is a real place, a village on the shore of an alpine lake that is often listed as one of the most beautiful places in Europe. It has colorful wooden houses, mountains reflected in still water, and a peacefulness that seems unlikely on a continent that has seen 2 world wars. You wouldn't expect to find a group of crazy assassins living there. That's why it works so well as a story choice. The difference between how beautiful the outside is and how horrible the inside is the most direct visual metaphor the movie gives for the cult. Most people don't notice that the Hallstatt scenes were shot not in Hallstatt itself, but mostly in Czech towns like Kladno, Kurim, and Kolin. Hallstatt was only used for some specific exterior shots. This shows how important it is for big-budget movies to have controlled environments for complicated action scenes. When Eve gets to town, everyone is there to greet her. It's not an ambush where a lot of enemies show up from different places. It's even worse than that. The people in the town just stop what they're doing and look at her. People of all ages, including old people, young people, and people with groceries. All members of the cult. Everyone is ready to kill. There is a quiet horror in the scene that is more effective than any jump scare or dramatic reveal. You know right away that Eve has entered a place where no one is neutral, where everyone is a potential threat, and where she will have to fight her way out inch by inch. Eve fights. Eve is running. Eve uses the environment like someone who is being swallowed by numbers and is desperately trying to keep the goal in mind. And in the end, she is caught, as she must be. The Chancellor sees her, and that's where Ballerina shows its most important card, which no one, not even Eve, saw coming. Gabriel Byrne plays the Chancellor, and he does so with the calmness of someone who has never had to yell to get everyone in the room to stop breathing. It's a performance that works by taking things away. Byrne takes away everything that would be easy for an action movie villain, like the direct threat, the power speech, and the flaunted violence. What is left is the most disturbing, an absolute calm, a genuine conviction, and the feeling that this man believes every word he says. The Chancellor doesn't act like a monster. He acts like he knows something you don't, and is willing to wait forever for you to figure it out. The movie changes frequencies when he tells the truth about the cult. The cult is not a group of people. It is not a criminal group like the High Table, which has a bureaucratic structure and money-making goals. The Chancellor calls it a sanctuary, and he means it. A safe place for former assassins who wanted to leave the organized crime networks around the world and live by their own rules. In a place that doesn't follow the laws of any government or the rules of any established assassin group. People in Hallstatt don't kill for money or to show their loyalty to a political party. They kill because they chose this way of life and fight for it with the zeal of people who mistake choice for identity. You can strongly disagree with everything the Chancellor stands for and still get what he says on a logical level. What makes the character truly disturbing is not the cruelty, but the clarity. And then you find out something that changes everything you've seen up to that point. The Chancellor says that Daniel Pine is his son, that Ella is his granddaughter. When Pine left the cult with Ella, he wasn't just an ex-member leaving an organization. He was a son stealing a child that the Chancellor thought was his by blood and belonging. It's on purpose and ruthless that Eve's story is so similar to hers, since her father also ran away from an organization with a daughter. The script is making a point about cycles and how systems that are based on owning children keep the trauma that caused them going. But the biggest surprise is still to come, when Lena walks into the cell where Eve is being held. The next thing that happens is the best part of the whole movie. Eve's sister is Lena. Catalina Sandino Moreno gives this reveal in a way that makes it more powerful instead of less powerful. There are no tears or drama. Lena is the only one looking at Eve with the look of someone who has been dreaming about this moment for years, and now that it has come, she doesn't know how she feels anymore. She tells what happened. Javier ran away with Eve and left Lena behind. Not because he was a bad father, but because the cult had brainwashed Lena enough that Javier thought she was lost. So trying to take her with him would have been impossible or dangerous for Eve to escape. Lena thought her father had left her when she was a child. Eve thought she was the only daughter her father loved enough to save. Both stories are partly true and completely heartbreaking. Sandino Moreno makes Lena a woman who made peace with being left alone by turning her devotion to the only system that never turned her away. The cult. You can't hate her completely because you know how her mind works. And you can't fully justify her because that mechanism leads to violence and fanaticism. It's the kind of character that action films don't usually take the time to develop. The Chancellor orders both of their deaths. Lena has done her job of revealing the truth, and now she is a symbol of divided loyalty that he can't stand in his system of absolute control. Eve gets away. Lena doesn't. She dies in the same town and system that made her, which is a sad end. That makes perfect sense with everything the character stood for. Lena's death is one of the most real moments in Ballerina. The movie doesn't want you to cry for her. It doesn't show her in a good light of redemption in her last moment. It just shows a woman dying because of the choices she made after she was wronged as a child. It is sad in a way that doesn't have a clear answer, and the movie is brave enough to leave it that way. Eve runs away into the streets of Holstadt, and the action scene that follows is the best part of the movie. The battle in the city streets is a demonstration of what 7/11 and Ana de Armas built together over months of prep. It was mostly shot in Czech locations that look enough like Hallstatt for the illusion to work. The space is used with architectural intelligence. Narrow alleys that take away the enemy's numerical advantage, wooden structures that create both problems and chances at the same time, and the uneven ground of a medieval town that makes it hard for one person to run or fight in a straight line. And then comes the part that everyone talked about the most in the movie, the flamethrowers. The part where Eve and a cult member fight with real flamethrowers, no special effects. No CGI, just real equipment, making real fire on settees, the kind of creative use of visuals that only happens when a production decides that reality is more impressive than any digital simulation. 7/11 made it clear to the public that the flamethrowers worked. Ana de Armas said that she worked the equipment herself in the scenes that are in the movie. Director Wiseman said that 90% of the movie's action scenes were done for real. The visual effect is clear. The flames have a weight and danger that no digital effect can match. You can almost feel the heat in that scene, not because the screen gets hot, but because your brain knows what real fire is and reacts. Without a doubt, It is one of the best action scenes of 2025. Jackson. Spittle and his team built the scene in layers of safety that let the actors use the equipment within set limits. However, the flames were real, and the danger was real in the sense that it required respect and precision. You can see that respect in every frame of the sequence. The Battle of Hallstatt ends with Eve reaching the Chancellor, which was the goal of the whole second act. And this is where the movie makes a choice that some people found annoying, but that, I think, is one of the smartest in the script. The Chancellor tries to talk some sense into Eve. He doesn't ask for help. He doesn't try to pay her off. He makes his case. He talks about blood, heritage, and how silly it is for two cycles of violence to meet in a stalemate where both sides have lost more than they gained. He is a man who really thinks that there is a reason for the way things are that will change the inevitable conclusion if Eve can just see it. Eve kills him regardless. This is the right thing for the character and the movie to do. Eve isn't there to talk about the moral implications of revenge. She is there because a man ordered her father's death when she was a child. And that same system took the sister she never knew she had. The universe she lives in has no justice systems other than the ones you make yourself. The Chancellor's logic is real, and had nothing to do with what Eve had to do. They save Elapine, who survived Dex's gunshot, is getting better at the Prague Continental. The family finds a way to stay alive that isn't perfect. It's not resolved, it's not healed, but it's surviving. And Eve stands in the middle of everything she destroyed, having achieved her goal, but not having solved anything inside herself. That's when John Wick shows up. The director knew that Eve would not listen. It's not a guess. The movie gives you enough hints to figure it out on your own. The director trained killers for decades. She knows determination when she sees it. And what Eve carried wasn't just the trained determination of a Kikimora on a mission. It was something older and deeper, something that had been there since a night in childhood that no amount of training could erase. The director was aware, and did what they said. When the Chancellor declares war on the Ruska Roma because Eve invaded Hallstatt, the director doesn't freak out. She calms the Chancellor down with such precision that it shows how much she had already thought about the situation. She says that Eve did it on her own. Eve left the Ruska Roma. So, the Ruska Roma is not to blame for what Eve did. And to show that this break is real and not just talk, the director does something that is both a political solution and a personal betrayal. She hires John Wick to kill Eve. Wikipedia talks about a deleted scene that goes into more detail about how this decision was made than the theatrical cut does. The director was calling in the favor John owed her since the events of Parabellum, when she helped him escape at great personal cost to herself. In the theatrical cut, this link is implied, which is enough for fans of the franchise but may not be clear to people who haven't seen Parabellum in a while. John gets to Hallstatt. It's important to know that Keanu Reeves is 58 years old, not just because he's getting older, but also because it helps you understand what's happening on screen. He still does the physical work with a level of dedication that would be impressive in someone 20 years younger. The way he moves in Ballerina, with that specific ergonomy of gestures that defines John Wick, every movement with purpose, no waste, is the result of decades of discipline that goes far beyond any one production. You can feel how heavy everything is for John when he shows up in Hallstatt, not just in the movie, but in the whole series. Every choice, every scar, every loss. he quickly finds Eve. Eve, who just finished a fight and is very tired, killed the man she wanted to kill but didn't find any of the answers she was looking for on the other side of revenge. John wins, though. The fight doesn't last long. It's not a long fight scene where the two are equally skilled and face off. John has more experience, is colder, and works faster. The movie is honest when it says that Eve fights with everything she has, and it's not enough. It would be easy and dishonest for the story for Eve to stand up to John Wick at this point. She is not him yet, and maybe she will never be him because she isn't him. She is different, but John does something that the character would do here. He stops. He stops and talks to Eve after she has been beaten and the mission is technically over. And what he says is similar to what he said when they first met briefly during her training. That there is a choice outside of the cycle. That the world they both live in isn't the only one that could exist. That the revenge she just did won't set her free like she thought it would. John Wick is talking to himself when he says this to someone else. He spent 4 films in a cycle of violence that started with trying to mourn the deaths of his wife and dog. The cycle never really ended, never really solved anything, and never set him free. He knows exactly what he is talking about when he talks to Eve. He lived it. Eve hears and asks. She doesn't beg for mercy or ask him to let her live out of pity. She wants some time, until midnight, to finish what she started. At that point, the Chancellor was still alive. John hadn't killed her yet, and John gives it to you after. A pause that lasts just long enough for you to feel the weight of the choice. From a thematic point of view, this is Ballerina's main choice. A man who has been in a cycle of violence for years gives a young woman the chance to break her own cycle. He doesn't do it because he thinks it's right, but because he knows he can't stop what he's done over and over again. There is a real sense of humility in this moment. Even though John Wick is being very cold and tactical, this is the most human side of the character that we have ever seen in the whole series. The last Holstadt scene is next. Eve goes back to face the Chancellor, and John acts as a distant sniper, picking off Dex and other cult members from places Eve can't reach on her own. It's a partnership that was never clearly agreed upon, but it works like 2 assassins who know the geometry of combat without having to talk about it. This dynamic is poetically effective because John and Eve never fight next to each other in the same space. He is always far away, covering angles she can't see and clearing away obstacles before she gets to them. It is the least expensive way for 2 people who are technically on opposite sides of the same mission to work together. Eve kills the Chancellor. Ella is saved. And then there's the part that sets the film's emotional tone. Not an explosion of relief or victory, but a heavy silence. Eve stands in the middle of a ruined Hellstead and doesn't feel what she thought she would. The revenge is done. The man who told her father to kill himself is dead. She also lost her sister, who she never knew she had. Ella's grandfather is back in the future, and she is a safe child on a timeline where that safety will last until the next cycle. Starts. John tells the director that the Chancellor has died, and she accepts it without any fanfare. The truce is still in effect because Eve acted on her own and not as a representative of the Ruska Roma. Everyone agrees to believe this convenient lie because it keeps the delicate balance that keeps peace in this universe. John goes, Eve goes, back to New York. The last scene at the New York Continental is one of the most beautifully put together in the movie. Charon is there, and Lance Reddick is calm and perfect as always, with no hint of what the viewer knows will happen to him next. In time, Winston is present, and Winston tells Eve, in a way that McShane is very good at, that the survivors of the cult will want revenge, that she is in danger, that the cycle hasn't ended. It has only begun a new chapter. This is something Eve knows. You can tell she knows it because she takes the warning without being surprised, without falling apart, and without the emotional reaction that would be easy to film and false for the character. The last scene shows Eve at the theater watching Tatiana's ballet performance. Tatiana's Eve's training friend and the only person in the movie who is close to being innocent in this universe. She was thrown out of the Ruska Roma before the system completely took over her. Eve is in the audience, watching the dance. She could have been what she would have been if her childhood had gone differently. Then her phone starts to vibrate. There is a $5 million reward for Eve's head. She sees it, stands up, and leaves the theater without looking back. The movie ends there, not with a resolution or a victory, but with Eve moving. Always on the move. The movie doesn't say where, but the path is clear. Forward to the next chapter. To the next fight in a life that has been full of fights. Since before she could choose to do anything else, this is the right ending for this. Character at this point in the story, not satisfying in the usual way. It doesn't give you the emotional closure that simpler action films do, but it fits with who Eve is and the world she lives in, and it leaves enough room for a sequel if there is one to do more than just add new action. It should also have real character development, real consequences, and relationships that were formed and need to be deepened. The dance is over. It's clear that the show isn't over yet. There is a question that every established franchise spin-off needs to answer in the first 20 minutes. Can the main character carry the movie by themselves? Ballerina answers this question with surprising clarity early on. Yes, with Ana de Armas. But what makes this answer interesting isn't how simple. It's how much specific and planned work Ana did to make it happen. It's not the same to carry an action movie as it is to carry a drama. In a drama, you need the audience to believe in the characters in a life, which includes their feelings, their conflicts, and the times when they don't speak. In an action movie, you need all of that plus one thing that can't be faked: being there in person. The body has to be convincing. The movements need to have some weight. The danger has to seem real, not because the viewer doesn't know it's fiction, but because the actor's body has to move in a way that makes sense during the danger. No matter how many edits or special effects are used, Ana de Armas does both. And the way these two things work together is what makes Eve Macarro's performance stand out from other franchise spin-offs. Let's start with the physical part, since that's what most people were most interested in before seeing the movie. Ana is 5 feet 4 inches tall, which Hollywood calls elegant but not imposing. Before Ballerina, she mostly worked in dramas, psychological thrillers, and mystery comedies. The question that has been going around since the casting announcement is, can she be believable as a combat force in a world where Keanu Reeves is the standard? The movie's answer to this question is smart, because it doesn't agree that credible means the same as Keanu Reeves. Eve doesn't have to be John Wick. Eve has to be Eve Macarro. And Eve Macarro has a whole different physical vocabulary that Ana built over 4 months of prep and that the movie uses all the time. Eve uses redirection instead of direct force like John Wick does. He takes the hit with his own strength, while she avoids it by being fast and in the right place. The character's background in ballet isn't just for show. It's a way of moving that can be seen in every fight scene if you look closely. Ballet training teaches you how to use your center of gravity and how to move your body weight around to get an edge in tight spaces. This is what makes Eve's fighting style different from anyone else's in the universe. Ana was this. Not mechanically, as if she were doing a dance she had learned by heart, but in a way that makes it seem like Eve really knows her body and what it can and can't do. Ballerina is where Ana de Armas really surprises people. Even though the physical part is impressive, she surprises in the quiet. There is a certain point in the movie when Ana just stands there looking at Catalina Sandino Moreno. This happens after Lena tells Eve that she is her sister, after the Chancellor orders both of their deaths, and before the action scene starts again. It might only be 10 seconds of screen time. No talking, no big gesture. Ana de Armas's face is just processing information that changes the whole life story of the character. 10 seconds doesn't seem like a long time, but in that exact moment, in that exact silence, you can see Eve understand something that is hard to fix. Her father died protecting her, but he also left an older daughter behind to do it. That the woman in front of her, who was once her enemy, kidnapped her and is now trying to kill her, is also a victim of the same cycle that hurt Eve. And that doesn't change what needs to happen, but it does change how heavy everything feels. This kind of work, where an actor's face shows the emotional complexity of a scene without any dialogue, is what makes performances that serve the story different from performances that make the story better. Ana makes it better. This quality shows up in other parts of the movie as well. The opening scene where young Eve loses her father is set up quickly, but when adult Eve finds the cult's mark on a dead attacker, the camera pans to Ana's face for a moment that lasts no more than 2 or 3 seconds. In that moment, you can see the little girl come back, the childhood night come back, and the weight of something that was never resolved come back right away. It's an emotional flashback that doesn't have a picture. The performance does all the work. The scene at the New York Continental with Ian McShane, where Winston tells Eve about Daniel Pine, also works because Ana plays Eve in a way that could be seen as coldness, but is really desperate control. Eve is ready to blow up. Eve wants to yell that the whole system is wrong, that the director is wrong, and that the truce that protects the killers of her father is horrible. Instead of doing that, she listens, takes it in, and then acts. She has the same discipline. That ballet and combat training gave her body to control her anger. Ana finds this balance and keeps it perfectly throughout the whole movie. About the accent question, it's something that has to be brought up. Ana de Armas is Cuban and grew up there. She went to Spain to start her career and then moved to Hollywood. English is her third language. Some American critics said that the accent in Ballerina is wrong at times. I think this is a fake problem that looks like a real problem. Eve's accent makes perfect sense for her character in the story. She is a woman who grew up in a European organization with ties to Roma culture and moves between New York, Prague, and Austria. Not Ana's performance, but the idea that a main character in a global assassin Universe should sound like someone from Ohio is what needs to be questioned. The film's use of Eve's relationship with dance is also important because it isn't just a pretty metaphor. It's a real psychological window. In the first act, Eve practices ballet alone in a studio at night because the director told her she couldn't go after the cult. There is no dialogue or narration in this scene. It's just Eve dancing in an empty space, and the dance has a certain quality of contained rage. The technical movements are perfect, but the emotional intensity is more than what any formal performance would need. It's Eve putting things into her body that she can't say. Ana does this scene with both physical and emotional commitment, which is hard to do technically, but she makes it look completely natural. That's the kind of detail you might not notice the first time you watch, but it sticks with you. For example, the way Ana's character uses movement to express her feelings in ways that words can't. Ana's job in Ballerina is the same as any actor's job in a franchise spin-off. She has to make a character that is independent enough for the story to work on its own and connected enough to the existing universe that fans of the franchise feel at home. It's a tricky balancing act. If you lean too much toward independence, Eve feels like a generic action character who is just living in a borrowed world. If you lean too far toward connecting with the universe, she disappears into John Wick's shadow. Ana finds the right amount. Eve Macarro is a fully developed character with her own backstory, motivations that don't depend on John Wick to make sense, and an emotional arc that would still be interesting even if the Continental, gold, coins, and high table didn't exist. At the same time, she fits into this world as if she was always meant to be there. If Ballerina is good, and it is good in a lot of ways, it's mostly because Ana de Armas thought Eve Macarro deserved the same amount of attention that Keanu Reeves gave John Wick, and then she went and did just that. An action movie is only as good as the people who help it. The John Wick series has known this truth since the first movie and has never let it go. The world of professional assassins that Derek Kolstad made works because the people who live on its edges are just as well thought out as the main character. Winston is more than just a hotel manager. The director is more than just the head of the group. Charon isn't just a concierge. Each of these characters has a history, a way of thinking, and a set of values that are different from those of other characters. This creates real tension without needing a lot of explanation. Ballerina takes on this tradition and mostly keeps it. Let's start with Ian McShane. He plays Winston, the supporting character who does the most work in the movie. McShane plays him like someone who has lived in this man's skin for years. Winston's skirt is a walking contradiction. He works within a strict set of rules, like the laws of the Continental and the commandments of the High Table. At the same time, he uses those rules to his advantage, which makes it seem like the rules are only there for people who really understand. Then, Winston isn't breaking the rules when he helps Eve by giving her Daniel Pine's information. He is using the Continental's information structure in a way that can't be technically disputed. It's the difference between bending a system and breaking it. Winston bends with the grace of a master. McShane plays this with a warmth that is intentionally hard to read. When he looks at Eve, he seems to care about her like a father would. He knows how hard it will be for her to choose the path she is on. And at the same time, you can never be sure that Winston isn't just figuring out how much Eve is worth as an asset on a bigger board that she doesn't even know about. The character's ambiguity is the most interesting thing about the story, and McShane makes sure to keep it in every scene. In Ballerina, Anjelica Huston has less screen time as the director than she does in Parabellum, but she makes the most of every minute by being authoritative. The director doesn't talk too much. She says everything with the care of someone who has spent years learning that information is power and that giving too much away is always a weakness. When she says no to Eve's request about the cult, it's not just a cold, simple no. It's more complicated than that. It's a woman who understands what Eve is asking and may even sympathize with the reason behind the request, but who has to follow institutional rules that don't allow for exceptions based on feelings. Huston does a great job of making sure you never question the director's intelligence. You can see that Eve always knew this could happen and had already planned how to deal with it before it happened, even when the results of her choices cause chaos, like when Eve disobeys and causes chaos that forces the director to hire John Wick. It is the performance of a woman playing chess in a world where most people don't know how to play yet. In my opinion, Gabriel Byrne as the Chancellor is the best thing about the supporting cast. Byrne's career has been long and uneven. He has worked on some amazing films, some more practical ones, and for a long time he was mostly on TV. But in Ballerina, he is fully present in a way that the role calls for, which not every actor of his generation could do with such precision. The Chancellor is a bad guy, but Byrne won't let him be one. Byrne never tries to get the viewer's attention by smiling or making a gesture that says, "Look how threatening I am." The Chancellor is so sure of himself that it's more disturbing than any evil act could ever be. When he talks about the cult as a safe place and explains why he does what he does as a father and grandfather, Byrne keeps the characters internal. Consistency even when it leads to objectively horrible behavior. The last scene between the Chancellor and Eve, in which he tries to reason with her before he dies, works because Byrne plays it as a real scene of persuasion, not as a villain's last act. He really thinks that there is a way to change the outcome until the very end. This wrong idea is what makes the character real. Byrne carries it with such grace that it turns what could be a mechanical resolution scene into something that really hits home. Daniel Pine, played by Norman Reedus, is an interesting character because he is mostly there to help Eve's story. But Reedus makes him more than just that. Pine is a defeated man in the most literal sense. The system that made him has beaten him. The system that he tried to escape has beaten him, and Dex's bullet has beaten him. Reedus shows this loss by making his body feel tired. His shoulders are slumped, his eyes move from point to point without settling on anything. And the way he talks makes it sound like he's still measuring every word, but doesn't have the energy to do it as well as before. You don't like Pine. You know this person because they made bad choices for reasons that make some sense. And now they have to deal with the consequences of those choices in a way that doesn't have a clear end. It's important to know that. Wiseman chose Reedus for the role because he has plans for the character in a possible second film. This information helps us understand Pine in Ballerina. This is a good way to introduce him because it leaves room for growth. The movie doesn't show how Pine and Ella, a father and daughter who have been through a lot of trauma, fix their relationship. Instead, it just starts with all the difficulties of two people trying to relearn how to be there for each other after everything that happened between them. We've already talked a lot about Catalina Sandino Moreno as Lena in the narrative analysis. But it's important to point out the one thing about her performance that makes her reveal the most important in the movie. Lena is played by Sandino Moreno, who doesn't ask anything of the audience. She doesn't want your sympathy. She doesn't want you to understand her, and she doesn't give any hints about how you should feel about the character. She is simply Lena, with no conditions or excuses, and you can do whatever you want with that. It's not common for characters in a script that is clearly meant to have an emotional impact to refuse to be manipulated emotionally. This is what makes the impact real when it lands. And then there's Lance Reddick. There are 2 times in Ballerina when Charon shows up. The first is at the beginning, when Winston takes young Eve to the New York Continental. The second is at the end, when Eve goes back to the same place after everything that happened. They don't last long, but every second of Lance Reddick's time on screen is heavy with everything he built with this character over 5 films in the franchise. What makes his performance in Ballerina so amazing is that it was filmed in November 2022, 4 months before he died, and it was the same as always. There is no evidence to suggest that Reddick knew it would be the last time he played Charon. He just did the work with the same dedication and presence that he always brought to the role. Charon is there, perfect, quiet, and loyal in a way that shows he chose to serve out of personal integrity, not because he had to. The movie doesn't try to make you feel anything when you see Lance Reddick for the last time on screen. There is no sad music playing in the background of his scenes, and there is no framing that makes you feel the loss. If you feel sad, it's because of what you know about him, what this character stood for, and the fact that this amazing man will never be on screen again. Some gifts in films come out of nowhere, and sometimes they are the last ones. There is a part of Ballerina that lasts about 45 seconds and has no action in it. Eve is in a hallway at the Prague Continental after the fight in Pine's room. The camera is not moving. The lighting is low, amber, and has a hint of green, which is a common color for the film's cinematography to use in spaces that are both luxurious and threatening. Eve is resting against the wall. She doesn't do anything. She just breathes. 45 seconds seems like a short time. But in that exact scene, with that exact framing and lighting, you learn more about Eve's mental state than any amount of dialogue could in 5 minutes. That is how cinematography should work, not as a way to show a story that could be told by narration, but as its own language that only an image can say. Romain Lecourbe's, the director of photography for Ballerina, created a visual palette that pays homage to the style of the franchise's earlier films without copying it exactly. The John Wick films have a very distinct look. For example, the contrast between huge, luxurious spaces and the brutal intimacy of fight scenes, the use of neon lighting at night, and the fact that they prefer long takes that show the actors' full bodies during action. Lecourbe takes all of this and adds something that only Ballerina has, a focus on the female face as a narrative space. The John Wick films, which had a male lead, didn't have as much reason to look at it in the same way. The movie has a color scheme that is worth noting. The ballet studio, the theater backstages, and the training rooms in the Ruska Roma spaces are all shot with a bluish coldness that is both elegant and clinical. The cold spaces in Hallstatt are warmer and more earthy, with that alpine beauty. That looks natural, but hides the horror underneath. And the continental spaces, where both worlds touch, but neither completely rules, have that unique amber-green mix that makes you feel like you're always in a state of uncertainty, you are safe. As long as you follow the rules, but the moment you break them, you are no longer safe. This color language is not random. Lecubas and Wiseman carefully thought about how each space should look and feel, and these choices help the story in ways that the viewer may not even be aware of. This is where the analysis has to be honest about what works and what doesn't. Work in Len Wiseman's direction. Wiseman is a good director who knows how to make things look good. He was naturally fluent in dark fantasy and sci-fi worlds with complicated internal hierarchies because of his work on the Underworld franchise. This is similar to the world that John Wick lives in, but with a different style. He knows how to put together a scene, how to use physical spaces to build tension, and how to tell the difference between action that serves the story and action that is just there to be there. There is an undeniable confidence in the direction of Ballerina in the second act, the arrival in Holstered, the flamethrower sequence, and the final fight with the Chancellor. This part of the movie has action scenes that were planned and carried out by people who really know the language they are using. The film is less consistent in some places, like the first act, the scenes that connect action scenes and some world-building scenes. In these places, the film has a lightness that is different from the heaviness that the best parts of the film achieve. They are not fatal flaws that ruin the movie. There are times when you think that a different hand, with more force, could have gotten more out of it. And this is where you can really see Chad Stahelski's work during the extra shoots. In 2024, if you know his work, the action scenes in the second half of Ballerina are much more precise and sure of themselves than some of the ones in the first act. If you've seen all 4 of the main John Wick films, and then Ballerina, you'll notice that the more complex action scenes use language that goes beyond what 87, 11 alone would make. It's the difference between an action team carrying out a vision and an action director putting together a scene based on a certain idea of how people should look when they fight on screen. This doesn't mean that Wiseman's work isn't good. It is important to understand that Ballerina got help from 2 different creative points of view, and the 2 of them together made something more complete than either of them could have made on their own. The editing of the movie, done by Nicholas Lundgren, Jason Ballantyne, and Julian Clark, is worth noting because 3 editors on one project is an unusual setup that usually means the material was too complicated to put together with just one point of view. The edit works especially well during action scenes because the cuts are timed just right for 8711's choreography, either too fast to make it hard to see what's going on, nor too slow to lose the kinetic energy that defines the style. The editing is more standard in the more story-like parts, which is fine. Ballerina doesn't need great writing in the dialogue scenes. It needs clear writing, and that's what it gets. The soundtrack by Tyler Bates and Joel J. Richard deserves special mention because it is not only a musical choice, but also a statement of belonging to the universe. Bates wrote the music for all of the main John Wick films, and his style is easy to spot. A mix of electronic orchestration and percussive textures that builds tension without the kind of sublinear emotional presence that most scores use to tell the viewer how to feel. Bates's music for the John Wick universe is often more architectural than emotional, and it creates space around the action without filling it with feelings that are set in stone. In Ballerina, Bates and Richard make an interesting change that is good for Eve's character. There is a string texture in the score that shows up in the movie's more emotional scenes, like those about Eve's relationship with Lena, her father's memory, and ballet. This texture has a lyrical quality that the John Wick movies don't often have. It's not being sentimental. It's because Eve Macarro is a character with a more openly accessible inner life than John Wick. And the score can show this without going against the tone of the universe as a whole. Even though it was a little chaotic behind the scenes, the decision to switch Marco Beltrami and Anna Drubich for Bates and Richard made a score that fits the movie better than a new, unfamiliar score probably would have. There are times in Ballerina when the music does what the best film music does. It adds a layer of meaning that the image alone wouldn't have the same effect. When it comes to flamethrowers, it's hard not to bring them up when talking about craft. The choice to use functional, practical tools for that scene is part of the production philosophy that sets this franchise apart from almost all of its competitors in the modern action market. CGI has come a long way and can now make fire look very realistic, but it can't copy how real fire affects the air around it, the lighting in the scene, or how actors act when they're close to a real flame. These details are hard to see on their own, but together they create a texture of reality that the viewer can feel without necessarily knowing what it is. When you watch that scene, you don't think, good CGI. You think, this is happening? The difference is small in words but huge in experience. And it's because the production chose real difficulty over digital ease. The John Wick series is still what it has always been, a small business in a world of mass-produced goods. Ballerina came out in theaters in early June 2025. With the kind of unclear expectations that films with complicated productions always have. Fans of the franchise were excited, but there was also a lot of distrust because of months of news about reshoots, delays, and composer changes. The market wasn't completely sure, and the numbers from the opening weekend showed that Ballerina made $24.5 million in its first weekend in the US. It came in second place, behind Lilo and Stitch. Disney's live-action remake has been at the top of the American summer box office for a long time, which is something few franchises can do. Ballerina was expected to make between $28 million and $30 million. So the actual amount was a little less than what was expected. It wasn't a disaster, but it also wasn't the big win that Lionsgate needed. The second weekend was more worrisome. Ballerina fell to fifth place with a 62% drop from $24.5 million to $9.4 million. It was behind Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, Materialists, Lilo and Stitch, and How to Train Your Dragon. A drop of more than 60% in the second weekend usually means that word of mouth wasn't strong enough to keep people interested. Beyond the first core fan base, Ballerina made $58.1 million in the US and Canada and $79.1 million around the world, for a total of $137.2 million. The movie cost $90 million to make, and marketing costs for films of this size are often equal to or higher than production costs. Because of this, the movie did not make a profit during its theatrical run. Lionsgate lost $94 million in net income during the time that Ballerina was playing. While this loss can't be blamed solely on the movie, financial analyses in the industry pointed to Ballerina as a major factor in the negative result. This result was important for a studio like Lionsgate, which doesn't have the money to lose money at the box office like Disney or Warner Bros. There is a real and interesting debate about whether the movie's title hurt its performance. In June 2025, the BBC published an article about this very issue. Whether or not calling the movie Ballerina without the John Wick prefix prominently displayed was a marketing mistake that confused people and made them less interested in seeing it. If they had known for sure that they were going to see a John Wick movie, they might have gone to the theater. The full marketing title, From the World of John Wick, Ballerina, tried to balance both parts, but it's a long, clunky title that doesn't have the same impact or brevity as just John Wick. Circumstantial evidence indicates that this title identity issue engendered significant friction. Some people who took exit polls didn't know what to expect. Some thought there would be more John Wick than there actually was, while others went to see Ana de Armas and were surprised by how intense the action was. Both groups were right in some ways, but they both show that marketing communication didn't make a clear, consistent expectation before the release. The title, Ballerina do Universo John Wick in Brazil, was more clear about this link, which probably helped the Brazilian audience have more realistic expectations. Now, let's talk about how critics felt about it, since box office numbers only tell part of the story. Ballerina got a 75% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes from 305 reviews. This is a good score, but it's the lowest of all the John Wick films. The four main franchise films have ratings of 86%, 89%, 89%, and 94%, respectively, on the same site. The critics on Rotten Tomatoes all agreed that the movie was an experience that gave Ana de Armas creatively brutal action, choreography, and a pleasantly strange origin story. And it gracefully pirouetted to the center stage of the Wickverse base. On 49 reviews, Metacritic gave it a score of 59 out of 100, which is mixed or average. This number shows more about how specialized critics disagree with each other than the Rotten Tomatoes number, which only shows how many people liked and disliked the movie without showing how strongly they felt. Ana de Armas, the action scenes. In the second half, the choreography by 8711, and Lance Reddick's appearance were all things the critics liked. The critics disagreed about the pacing of the first act, how deep the cult's mythology as an enemy was, and whether Ballerina could create a real cinematic identity beyond being a part of the John Wick universe. Alison Wilmore from Vulture wrote one of the best reviews, calling the movie absurd, electrifying, and beautiful. She said that even though the journey to that point was not smooth, Ballerina is definitely a John Wick universe movie in the fullest sense of the word. Clint Gage from IGN was more nuanced. He said that the movie confidently finds its footing in the second half, after a first act that takes a while to settle, and that when the second act's energy arrives, it's clear. Justin Clark from Slant Magazine took the more critical view, saying that Ballerina doesn't stand out as a standalone work in the universe. It lives in because it doesn't have a well-developed mythology of its own, and doesn't have strong narrative ties to the main timeline of the franchise. Interestingly, regular people liked it more than specialized critics did. CinemaScore, which is an exit poll of moviegoers on opening weekend, gave the movie an A grade on a scale from A+ to F. This is a strong sign of immediate satisfaction, which is different from how well the movie did at the box office the second weekend. This suggests that the problem wasn't the movie itself, but rather how easy it was to get to. In other words, people who went to the theater liked it, but the movie couldn't communicate its value to a wider audience beyond its core fans. PozTrack said that 87% of people liked it and 79% said they would definitely tell others to see it. These numbers should have led to a better box office performance, but they didn't, which suggests that the marketing failed, not the product itself. The conversation about what would happen to the franchise after Ballerina started right away and is still going on. Producer Erica Lee confirmed in March 2023. Months before the 2024 extra shoots even started, that Lionsgate wanted to make a sequel with Ana de Armas returning as Eve after the movie came out. Len Wiseman talked about his plans for a sequel. He said that Eve would have to deal with the consequences of her actions, that the cult survivors are a real threat, and that Norman Reedus' character has a planned arc that hasn't been fully explored yet. The money problem makes this future more complicated, to be honest. It's hard to sell a movie that didn't make money in theaters to a studio that is losing a lot of money every quarter. But there are things that make it less bad. Ballerina came out digitally in July 2025, VOD and streaming revenues, which are rarely shared with box office numbers, add a financial aspect that box office numbers alone don't show. In a market where the theatrical window is becoming more of a marketing event for a movie's afterlife on digital platforms, Ballerina's relative failure in theaters doesn't mean it can't keep going. It's clear that if there is a sequel, it needs to come with lessons learned. The marketing for the movie needs to be more clear about what it is. The story structure needs to have a better balance of pacing between acts. The cult's mythology needs to change too. It works well as an antagonist in Ballerina, but it doesn't have enough depth to support a franchise on its own. Eve Macarro has everything she needs to be the main character in a long-running series. The question is if Lionsgate and everyone else can build on her with the level of consistency that the character and the audience deserve. The answer, like most things in Hollywood, depends on how many numbers are still being crunched. So here we are at the moment of truth. Is Ballerina worth your time? Is it worth the 2 hours and 5 minutes it will take away from your life? Is it worth the ticket, the talk afterward, and the place it will have in your memory of films from 2025? The truth is that it depends on who you are when you walk into the room. And I'm not avoiding the question. This is the best answer I can give for a movie that has both good and bad parts and serves different audiences in different ways. If you've been a fan of the John Wick franchise since the first movie and wanted more of this world, more rules, more characters, and more of the action choreography that changed the genre, then Ballerina has a lot to offer you. The second half of the movie has the best action you'll see in a theater in 2025. The Holstad sequence, the fight with the flamethrower, and the climax with the Chancellor were all written by people who really know what makes this universe special. You will recognize and appreciate their confidence. If you've never seen John Wick and are going to see Ballerina because you like Ana de Armas, you won't have any trouble following the story. The script was written to be an entry point, and Ana's performance is good enough to stand on its own without any franchise context. But you will miss some layers, like the sadness of seeing Khan for the last time, the specific weight of watching Winston move through a system you know, and the satisfaction of seeing how Eve fits into a timeline you've already followed. You don't need to know about these layers to understand the movie, but they make it more enjoyable, so it's worth it to watch the first 2 films first. Now, Here's what the movie gets right. Ballerina shows beyond a reasonable doubt that Ana de Armas is a great action hero. She is not John Wick with long hair. She is Eve Macarro, a character she made up with her own physical and emotional vocabulary. The difference between the two characters is one of the most interesting things about the movie. Anyone who loves the John Wick franchise will find it very interesting to see how the universe changes when the person looking at it is different, more surface level, emotional, more clearly driven by personal loss, and more willing to lose itself for a moment before coming back together. 8, 7, 11. Single quotes action choreography is still the best in the business. No other action team in Hollywood makes work that is always this good and believes in respecting the viewer. They believe that audiences should see what is happening, that camera and editing shouldn't lie about how good the actors are, and that the human body in motion is interesting enough to show without using fake tricks. In its best scenes, Ballerina lives up to this idea. Gabriel Byrne's performance as the Chancellor is one of the most interesting villainous roles the franchise has ever had. And I say this knowing the franchise has a long history of well-written villains. Byrne doesn't just make the Chancellor threatening, which makes the main conflict more interesting and stays with you after the movie ends. People treat Lance Reddick's posthumous appearance with the respect and dignity it deserves. The movie doesn't lose the actor's real-life death to get cheap emotional responses. Instead, it shows Charon as he always was, perfect and present, letting those who know what they know feel what they feel. This self-control is a sign of real respect. Now, what the movie doesn't quite finish. For about 20 minutes, the pacing of the first act hurts the movie. The story of Eve's beginnings is important and well acted, but the montage of this time period, 12 years of training, condensed into a sequence that has to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time, makes it feel rushed, which is the opposite of how dense the best parts of the movie are. You think the script is rushing to get to the present, and this rush means that the audience doesn't have time to get emotionally involved before the main action starts. The cult is a good villain for Eve's story, but it doesn't have enough depth to be a world-building element that is as interesting as the High Table or the Continental hold in the main franchise. The idea of ex-assassins living by their own rules in a small town is interesting, but Ballerina doesn't have the time or maybe the desire to really look into it. The Chancellor is a great villain. The cult as an organization is more general than the universe usually lets itself be. The movie also has a scale problem that it doesn't completely solve in its favor. The best John Wick films have a personal, epic quality to them. You get the sense that everything that happens has an effect on the whole world of assassins, and that every choice John makes is watched and weighed by people who control lives on a huge scale. Ballerina is a more personal, focused, and intimate story that could work as an origin story. There are times, though, when the movie seems smaller than the universe it takes place in, and this difference in scale is clear. There was a lot of talk before the movie came out about who directed what and which parts were shot in 2024. But sitting in the theater watching the movie, this doesn't matter as much. What's on screen is what's on screen, and it's good enough that the way it was made is interesting historical context, not something that gets in the way of enjoying it. Ballerina clearly passes a simple test for franchise spin-off films. The test is, do you want to know what happens to this character after the movie ends? Not because you feel like you have to keep the story going. Not because you want to see the next chapter of Eve Macarro's story, but because you really care about her as a person. Yes, after watching Ballerina with an open mind, I can say that. Eve is a character that was made with enough thought to be worth keeping. At the end of the story, she's kicked out of the Ruska Roma, has a bounty on her head, and realizes that the cycle of violence she tried to end has just changed shape. This leaves a lot of room for a second movie that could fix the first. One's pacing problems and build on what Ballerina started. Who should see Ballerina? People who like action films and real dance moves. Fans of the John Wick franchise want more from the universe. People who follow Ana de Armas' career want to see her in a role that requires her to do everything at once. And anyone who still thinks an action movie can be smart, artisanal, and respectful to the viewer without losing its entertainment value, who might have a hard time with the movie. People who expect the same mythical density as the main franchise. Films will find a structure that is a little more normal. People who need the first act to grab their attention right away will have to wait 20 minutes. In the end, Ballerina's a good movie that sometimes becomes a great movie. It introduces a character and an actress who, with the right creative support, have everything they need to make something truly amazing in a sequel. Eve Macarro got into the John Wick universe through the back door, in a movie that had a hard time being made, had a lot of public problems, and didn't do as well at the box office as it could have. But it still had its own style, a main character you will remember, and action scenes that will stick with you long after you leave the theater. Eve Macarro showed that there is room for other stories in a world that began with one man, a dog, and a promise of revenge, more losses, other types of dancers. The ballerina is on stage. It's her turn now.